Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Episodes like this are made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. This episode is powered by Dr. Ray Gorman, founder of Engage Movement. Learn how to boost your income without relying on sessions. Get a free training on the blended practice model by following at Ray Gorman DPT on Instagram. Joining me today on the podcast is Josie Stevens. Josie and I are going to dive into this concept of being an athlete for life. We talk about Josie's own athletic career in addition to what she's doing now and how she's found ways to fall in love with fitness and improving her own health and well-being. Enjoy. Josie, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today. Thank you so much for being here. For people who might not be familiar with you and all the incredible stuff that you're doing in the online fitness and performance space in particular, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the great things that you do day after day?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Josie Stevens. I am currently a personal trainer in Los Angeles. I'm a corrective exercise specialist, pre-postnatal certified. I am a former D1 soccer player as well. I work with clients both online and in person, and I am currently 10 months postpartum with my first child, which has also been a super fun, exciting experience.
That's amazing. Congratulations. And I think it's so interesting how you kind of blend a lot of different elements that I see coming up in the fitness and performance space together, in the sense that you've got experience as a high-level athlete, but you're also experienced in the sense that I think that pre and postnatal fitness is something that we're learning a lot more about and seeing a lot more about nowadays. And I think that there's something to be said about someone who can play competitive sport, regardless of what sport it is, at a very high level, and then continue to do active, highly athletic things for the remainder of their life. And unfortunately, that's something that I don't always see the case for a lot of athletes, whether it's, injury or they just don't enjoy training, they don't find it fun. It seems like a lot of athletes kind of lose that quote unquote athleticism after they step away from organized sport. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that, as far as how we can kind of take this concept of becoming athletic or remaining athletic for the remainder of our lives that way.
That's very interesting you bring that up, because I always say it's ironic. All of my friends, I'm still great best friends with all the girls from my soccer team at college, and they all are they work out, but they're much more, let me go on an incline walk treadmill. They very much have a bad association with fitness and working out in a way that I definitely don't. And I think that brings me back to the number one, I say, component of longevity is variation. And I think some people, it's a very broad term, and some people don't necessarily agree with variation, because consistency is really what drives adaptation in order for people to progress and get stronger. But I say variability is what drives overall health. And I think going back to being burnout, it's really something that everyone's lives are monotonous and consistent enough, and avoiding burnout psychologically is something you need to be doing different things. And I think that's not only great for yourself and just getting out of a different mental space, but just your overall well-rounded athletic development as well.
I think that's so interesting that you bring that up, because on that notion of consistency versus variability, I think that consistency to a certain extent is essential in order to get better at things. But, at the end of the day, a lot of what we program from an exercise standpoint comes back to simple variations of hinging or squatting or lunging or pressing or pulling or something. And, there's a lot of different ways to do those things. So I think that to a certain extent, you can be consistent in the general movement patterns that you train, but you can introduce enough variability within them week to week or even within sessions, that it keeps people engaged and entertained in what they're doing and why they're doing it. And I think that that's a huge element in the sense that, to the term that you mentioned, burnout, there's a lot of athletes that I've worked with who have trained really hard for a really long time, and they just feel like they don't enjoy training anymore. And I think that it's really unfortunate that so many people have this negative connotation associated with training and self-improvement.
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying variation to the point of like maybe F45 style either, but it's as simple as doing like an alternating weeks between trap bar deadlifts and straight bar deadlifts, or doing a weekly Metcon where you pick different movements each week. It's just very easy to switch out exercises to make it different.
You mentioned earlier that you had your son 10 months ago. And when we're all young, movement variability is the name of the game for us. Like, you put a kid on the recess playground and they literally move in so many weird, wild, crazy ways that I wouldn't even think of nowadays. And then we kind of get someone into organized, structured training, and we just kind of lose that whole concept of almost like play or movement variation, or we lose the ability to build our movement vocabulary, and we just kind of tend to hone in on certain things and build those deeply, as opposed to painting with a wide brush, if that makes sense. That might have been too many metaphors.
Oh yeah, no, I think I like that you brought up kids, because I think they are the absolute best example of variation and training for longevity. There's been tons of research that show kids who have played a variety of sports grow up to tend to be better overall athletes than kids who specialize in one sport their entire life. And it just promotes better, well-rounded athletic development. There's learning different motor skills. There's injury prevention. They're avoiding the overuse injuries. And again, like we said, avoiding burnout psychologically. And I think all of that stuff can be applied to the same exact way as we're adults and working out and training as an athlete or for longevity or whatever our overall goal is.
I completely agree. So walk me through kind of your personal experience on that side. In addition to playing high level soccer, what other sports did you play growing up? How did you kind of cultivate that quote unquote movement vocabulary or movement library early on? And then what kind of things do you do to keep yourself entertained and engaged in your own training that way?
Yeah, so I grew up playing mostly soccer. My dad, I liked soccer a lot, but my dad was really excited that I was so good at it and really wanted me to become the best and get the college scholarship and all of that stuff. So I was really pushed in that one direction my whole life. I did get burnout around my junior year of high school and said, I'm done with this. I want to quit. The college scouts were looking. It was too much pressure. I wasn't having fun anymore. So then I took a year off. I sort of had a panic moment where I was like, I need to play. So I went and started reaching out to a bunch of coaches in order to play and walk on and play in soccer. And that's when I kind of got really good at working out and getting in wicked good shape and knowing how to turn it on, go from 0 to 60. Around the middle of college, end of college, I got this pretty intense gut health issue. And I kept trying to train like I was the entire time through, until around 6 months to a year. And I was like, I'm completely depleted. I really need to turn it around and train differently. And I took my intensity back a lot. I started doing a lot more just functional, different, varied exercises. And that was a really cool learning experience for me, because I think a lot of people, college athletes especially, know how to train to get in wicked good shape, but they don't know how to turn up the dial or turn down the dial when they need to. They really can only go from 0 to 60, and that's what causes the burnout. So I like a lot that I knew and learned how to do that in that way. And again, same with my pregnancy, I kind of had to take the intensity back a ton and train a lot differently. And all those experiences kind of showed that, yeah, you really do need to train differently for different phases and different seasons of your life.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think it speaks to that concept of, that periodization term that seems to continue to get thrown around over and over again. I think you're right that the majority of athletes know how to train hard, and they understand if they just train hard at things, they're going to get better at them, but they don't always understand when to pump the brakes or they don't understand that it's not just about training hard, but it's about training hard in a manner that's going to allow you to achieve that higher level of performance that you're after at the right time. And I think that, the concept of periodization, in the sense that you kind of ramp up or build up slowly, or take steps forward and steps back based on the time of year that you're in, the time of season that you're in, it also enters this conversation really well. I know it's slightly controversial, but I think in general, having some kind of concept of, we're going to build up, build up, build up, build up, and then we're going to maintain, or we're going to go with a high-low model. So more of like your conjugate or undulating kind of periodization model that way. Understanding like there's an approach to training that can be a little bit more methodical, as opposed to just kind of go out there and put your nose to the grindstone day in and day out, over and over and over again. I think is really important. And it sounds like in your case, you learned that through experience, more so by getting burnout and running into a variety of health issues that, maybe some were related to training, maybe they weren't related to training, but understanding that life kind of forced your hand, as opposed to just kind of starting from this concept of, hey, we're going to break it up bit by bit, piece by piece, and focus on the long-term development, as opposed to just push really hard right now to get in great shape right now.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to even always have to do with intensity and volume going up and down. You asked earlier, how do I manage that today on a day-to-day basis? And I think I do go through seasons too, where I'm like, I'm going to focus these next few months on powerlifting, or after that, when I want to focus on calisthenics and just pull-ups and handstands and push-ups. And I think that also provides variety, and also provides, different stimuli and ways to not overuse my muscles, not to get burnout psychologically either.
Yeah, exactly. And you can mix a lot of those things together in your sessions as well. As your, GPP calisthenics could become your warm up, and your warm up could be 5 minutes of messing around with handstands and trying to get better at handstands. And next thing you know, your CNS is fired up and you're already sweaty from just 5 minutes of general work. So I think that there's ways to kind of take a lot of those different attributes that you mentioned and almost like microdose them into a single session where you get a little bit of everything, or like you mentioned, break them up into their own separate sessions, whether that be by months or based on how you're feeling and that sort of thing as well. And I think that's the other general concept to this is, once organized sport, and I'll kind of reference that as high school, college, or professional sport is, not in the picture anymore, I think that training in general is key to maintaining that longevity element. Performance longevity, we'll call it. And in the sense that a lot of people want to be active, they want to be able to, go to the beach and play volleyball and, still feel like an athlete. But you don't necessarily need the same level of organization and intensity that it might take in college or in professional in order to achieve that. A lot of the times I think that really well done training can be more than enough, if not beyond enough, to kind of provide that long-term athleticism that people are after. And the what and the why matters a lot less to me than just training in general, I feel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I say I training like an athlete and training for longevity aren't exactly the same thing, but they're still pretty darn close, because the goal of both is to train and perform tasks and functions either on the field or in daily life. And a lot of those things do overlap, because what you want to be able to do on the court or field is still some type of function that you want to be able to maintain the rest of your life.
Definitely. And you mentioned earlier that you focused a lot more on what you called functional exercise, and you just brought up that functionality term again here, Josie. What exactly does that functionality or functional training look like or entail for you that way? What does that mean? What does it look like? And how do we kind of define something as being functional in your mind?
Yeah, so functional is really a muddy term right now that people don't really always like, but it really is just performing things that you are going to do on a daily basis that help you practice them for your daily life. So that really could mean anything. If you're a rock climber, something that's functional is going to be practicing grip and practicing pull-ups. And yeah, and so it really is across the board. I think it's maintaining great movement through all planes of motion, and it's training for health rather than purely aesthetics or maybe a specific goal, let's say, or powerlifting. Maybe that's not quite as functional if you're just trying to get that deadlift.
Right, right. Yeah, no, and I think it's interesting because like you're alluding to, that term functional is going to look and feel different to everyone that way, you know. For some people, functional is going to be more along the lines of those big three movements, and for some it's going to be more along the lines of the GPP calisthenics stuff. But at the end of the day, I feel like, you know, understanding what a person needs to do about their day to day, whether that's athletic based or just day-to-day life based, or whether it's, you know, hey, they just want to be able to play pickleball because that's the in thing nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So understanding what demands life places on them, and then almost kind of like working backwards from there, or reverse engineering from there, what you're going to do and how you're going to intervene from an exercise standpoint, I think is a great way to do it, because then you kind of have that end goal in mind. And I think, to the point before about burnout, people are a lot less likely to get burnt out if they feel like what you're doing in the gym actually carries over to the things that they are focused on or care about. Because, you know, we'll be honest here, I've found a lot of people don't love the gym, but they love the results that come from training in the gym. So they'll train because they like what it does for them, not necessarily loving the whole concept of the gym and exercise and working out and getting sweaty and that sort of thing. On that note as well, Josie, I've noticed lately, Josie, that you've also shared a lot of various exercise flows and patterns and things that you really like that way. So what kind of things have you kind of gravitated towards on that functional side for your own training lately? And how does that carry over to the people that you work with? Do you find that you kind of like play around and experiment a lot with exercises and then find their way into client programs? Or do you find that your programming kind of looks different from what you're doing with your clients? Or what's that kind of like connection look like for you?
It's very true. Yeah, I definitely experiment with myself first and see what works well for me. And if something is working well for me, yes, I'll apply it to my clients. Right now, actually, I'm training for High Rocks in December. So that's been my main goal. But even it's very interesting because how I'm training for that is also going to be very beneficial to a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients never leave the V2 zone in their cardio, or they don't know how to properly jump or land or that sort of stuff. So I do think it's beneficial for kind of the seasons I go through with my clients. I also like kind of bringing them along for that ride as well.
Definitely. And it's interesting because you mentioned, you know, running, jumping, landing. And I think that sometimes people think that there's like a age limit to those things. And they're like, well, you know, I turned 30 this year. I'm never going to jump again, or I'm never going to sprint again. But in reality, I think, you know, people just up and stop doing them one day. And then next thing you know, 5 years passes and you haven't sprinted or you haven't jumped, and you kind of forget how to, or you lose your ability to do so because you just haven't done it in so long. So I think that keeping that as a mainstay in people's programs and kind of understanding that, you know, that use it or lose it principle kind of holds true. And, you know, the more we use some of these different qualities, even if it's just a little bit, the better off we're going to be, you know, 3 years down the line, 5 years down the line, and so on that way.
Yeah, no, I've fought with my parents at one point because they said, like, we don't like when you program step ups. We're not doing step ups. And I'm like, well, I know your balance is off and I know it feels uncomfortable, but if you're not doing step ups now, what is your life going to look like 5-10 years down the road? Or you're not going to be able to walk up the stairs anymore. So it's definitely important for people to keep that in mind. And I think people need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
I completely agree. And it's so interesting you mentioned getting comfortable while being uncomfortable, because I have not done a High Rocks event, but I would imagine those would be rather uncomfortable. I look at the amount of running and just general work capacity stuff that entails. And then, of course, ending with like a bunch of med ball wall balls, because why not? That's certainly something that's really challenging, yet I feel like it offers a really unique competitive edge to the whole fitness and performance side of things that I feel like a lot of athletes, or former athletes, I should say, kind of miss, right? Like, I'm sure when you played soccer, there's something about that competition day element that just kind of like, it hits different. I don't know
Oh,
how to
yeah.
put it into words, but there's something about the competitive side of sport that we just can't explain. And an event like High Rocks would kind of bring that competitive element back, but it brings it back to more of like the everyday fitness kind of world. And it kind of connects that fitness world with the athletic competitive world, I think.
Yeah, no, it's very true. I've always liked competition. I think it also gives you a goal and kind of a structure around different seasons of when to train, when to kind of take an off season, which I think is important for everybody. I used to do like a lot of running, and I ran a marathon, and I do like High Rocks because it is a fun strategy on trying to like, how can I not be the fastest, not be the strongest, but be that perfect little hybrid of both.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect example of kind of doing all the things really well. And it's interesting. You kind of mentioned the marathon and the soccer side and all the other different kind of sports backgrounds as well. And you even mentioned that you kind of like did a little bit of big three powerlifting training for a little bit as well. So it's kind of like trying to wear all the hats that way. And I think that any of those things, regardless of what side of the spectrum you're on, whether it's powerlifting and strongman or marathon running or soccer or whatever it is, you can work competitive elements into your training style. And I think that that's the kind of thing that will keep people engaged for a long time. And that's the kind of thing that will kind of enhance this kind of like longevity in training and longevity in performance is, understanding that competition has a tendency to bring out the best in people. And we can work that competitive element in every time we train someone, whether that's, in small groups or individual or online. There can be a competitive element to it, whether it's a weekly challenge or it's, some kind of like AMRAP or as long as possible exercise at the end of every session. There can be something that we do to almost like give people a little bit of taste of that competitiveness every single time that they train. And I think that the more we engage people like that, where they're competing not just against others, but against themselves to be better than they were the last time around, the more we're going to kind of channel that, like, I guess I would want to use the term intrinsic motivation to train, that is going to keep people going and going and going, as opposed to, just working for one specific thing. We achieve that thing and then they tap out and they're no longer engaged in training anymore.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I have lots of clients that would not consider themselves competitive at all, but they can get competitive with themselves when they want to do one more rep better than last week. And if I put them up against like their friend or their husband or somebody, they don't like it. But yeah, when they're competing about themselves, it's a huge motivator.
It definitely is. And it's the kind of thing that I feel like that fuel, the fire to fight that never runs out, so to speak. People are always willing to, one up themselves from the last time around. I found it so easy to incorporate, and you can really implement that in any population safely. And it's so easy to track that at the end of the day, I can't help but wonder why people don't take advantage of that more. Like, why do we just kind of go through the motions and training and not kind of tap into those higher motivational side of things, or higher motivational factors, I guess I should say, because I think the more that we help people fall in love with this process of training and improving their life, the better off they're going to be in the long term.
Yeah, no, definitely going back to, I think just because it's slightly uncomfortable, people kind of avoid it and turn away from it. And yeah, it's something that we just need to kind of push through.
You mentioned before the step up example, and you mentioned about, single leg balance and different things that way. What other kind of attributes do you like to work on or address in your programming that way? Is there anything in particular that jumps out to you as like, hey, I do a lot of this with people and all of a sudden they feel a lot better, or this improves or that improves or that sort of thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. Yeah, I would say jumping, landing is a huge one. A little bit of plyometrics. And I think when people hear plyometrics, they think of like doing something dangerous. It can just be a pogo, something really simple. I like to do a lot of frontal plane movement. I think that's something that even some of the people that are regulars in the gym don't do enough. And it really causes these imbalances and overuse issues that are a huge problem. I've heard that being super strong in one area and weak in another is much more dangerous than just being overall weak everywhere. And I tell all my clients that because it's very true. If you're going to do something, if you're a super strong guy, with your deadlift, but then you go to rotate really fast and it's super weak. Yeah, you're going to hurt yourself. And so I like to make people balanced overall throughout the entire body. I'd say those are the 7 main movement patterns: frontal plane movement, and jumping, landing, plyo.
I like that breakdown. And on that notion of, getting people out of just training forward and backwards, what is kind of that general ratio or general kind of breakdown of how much multiplanar stuff you do with athletes or clients that way? What's that kind of general number or general, picture look like? How much rotational stuff are they doing? How much frontal plane stuff are they doing? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'd say I probably keep it to about like a ratio of like 70% sagittal plane, 30% frontal plane, mostly because even though we are moving front to back in our daily lives, we are going to be needing that side to side movement a good amount. So I like to ease them into it as well, because it's something that a lot of them are not used to. We do Cossack squats, and very few people can hit that depth that they need to. And it's a combination of strength and mobility, which, it's not something we all have.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting that you mentioned that concept of the Cossack squat or Cossack squat and how so few people hit the depth that you're looking for. And it's interesting to me in the sense that a lot of times people think that they need to go lower or they need to go through a full range in order to get the full effects of an exercise. When in reality, I find a lot of times if you just get people to start with where they're at, they can gradually build exposure and build tolerance and progress over time, as opposed to thinking they have to go all in right from the start. I think it's a lot better to just start where you're at and progress long term.
Oh, yeah. No, if you did it every day without even really trying to get lower, you just naturally start getting lower and lower in that squat.
And on that note as well, there's a time to actually, in my opinion, restrict how low someone goes. I do this a lot with athletes when they're in season that way, because we know full range is going to require a lot more demand on different structures, which is usually a good thing. However, when athletes are in season, we have to keep the main thing the main thing. They don't care about training. They just want to play sport, and the best availability is making sure that they no, I think in general there's so much to be said about that. And I think I like the other element too. I like the kind of split between 70-30% sagittal and frontal plane, because I think that a lot of times we hear multiplane or movement vocabulary, and I think that we think we have to do everything multiplanar, when in reality, we still have to understand most of life does happen forward and back, like you mentioned. And it's all about finding that right balance that works for us, as opposed to just going all in on one thing to the next. And going back to what you mentioned before about consistency and variability, I think that kind of having a method to the madness in the programming here is essential, in the sense that you can't just kind of go and grab bag random program or random exercises every day. You still have to have some kind of organization and structure. However, that organization can still have some looseness to it, if you will.
I totally agree.
What other kind of considerations go into your programming? Are you looking to push people to train every day? Is it more of a 3-day a week kind of split, full body, upper versus lower? What does kind of the general rundown for that kind of like longevity athlete or yourself look like on the training side, Josie?
Oh, interesting. So very dependent on the client I'm training, on frequency of how often I want them to train per week. I personally train 5 days a week. I feel like that might be the max. I might say 6 days a week, but I always recommend at least one off day or at least one active recovery day. My favorite split is full body push, full body pull. I don't know that many people who do it like that, but I like working the entire posterior chain and then the entire anterior chain. I think it's just a really good breakdown. It sort of brings the same benefit of doing full body while still kind of giving those muscles a break and day to recover between. So I go back and forth, because I also like lower and upper body, but I feel like you really do kind of kill the upper body by doing a full upper body day or full lower body day. And that's just my personal preference. There's no science or research backing that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because a lot of times I found that, the science research side, if you will, is great and essential, but a lot of times what people are doing in the moment is what tends to be best, right? Like a lot of times the quote unquote best research backed exercise is not actually best in practice because athletes or people can't always do that exercise. So
Yeah.
it becomes more about how do we best provide for the person in front of us and what is the best for them look like as opposed to what's the best on paper.
Yeah. No, I like the full body push, full body pull because it brings that frequency that I want to hit the muscles I want pretty frequently without kind of overloading them each day.
That's a great piece. And the other side of it as well is I feel like when you're playing sports and when you played soccer, for example, like you don't just use one muscle group in sports. You kind of use a little bit of everything. So it kind of keeps that full body burn element from sports active later into your life, as opposed to, well, I'm going to the gym. Today's just quad day. So we're only going to work quads because, in sport, it never happens like that. So adding that kind of full body training element, I think is really a fun way to kind of mix it up that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think back in college, a lot of the girls on my team would be like, why are we training our upper body? We don't use our upper body. We're soccer players. And I think it's actually really important to train, especially for athletes, general athleticism overall and general strength, because yeah, we do mostly use our legs in soccer, but that means that they're going to be used every day at practice. We can't overload them more in the weight room. You kind of want to have the weight room be where we're going to bring in the variation and balance ourselves back out and not keep hounding the same exact thing over and over again.
Exactly. And I realized too, another element to this longevity side is time that people have to train. And when they're athletes, again, regardless of the level, high school, college, professional, their day is very structured. It's very regimented, and there's always time to train because training is such a priority for them. And then all of a sudden life happens and you become 25 years old and you're retired from sport or you're at 30 or whatever it is that way. And that same emphasis on training is not there. It's not as automatically built into your day-to-day life that way. So I think that having the ability to have time blocked aside and train consistently is important, but that time block is going to look different for some people. It might be 20 minutes a day, and for some, it might be 90 minutes a day. How do you go about kind of adding that time element to training into your own sessions and your client sessions that way? And what does kind of that split look like on the shorter end and the longer end?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Somebody who has 90 minutes to train 3 days a week, it's going to be a little bit different and a little bit more full body than it would be if someone's working maybe 15 minutes every day and they wanted to do a specific muscle group each day. They're still, both people are going to get the same volume throughout their entire week. It's just going to be split up a little bit differently. So that's definitely a factor as well when you're looking at the frequency of how often you're training throughout the week.
I think that there's a lot of different ways you can go about kind of adjusting and customizing based on the amount of time that someone has. I mentioned the term microdosing before. You can microdose a lot of little things in a short amount of time and cover a lot of different, movement patterns or goals or whatever you want to train in a short amount of time that way. It's pretty easy to get 30 different exercises in 30 minutes if you kind of have your time parameters set up correctly. 30 to 40 seconds on, 20 to 30 seconds off. And you've just covered a lot of different things in a short amount of time. On that note as well, on the longer side of things, you can go at it so many different ways. You mentioned about the High Rocks event, and if there's a specific quality that you would want to develop for that, whether that's maybe more just kind of the slow burn endurance side, or maybe it's just the anaerobic conditioning side that goes into a event like that. If you've got the additional time to do it, I feel like you can kind of dive in deeper. So I think understanding that if you know what the person in front of you is trying to work towards, and then you layer in their training history and training experience, and then you add that layer of what time do they actually have to train, then you can kind of go about thinking outside the box to kind of find a creative solution that works for them. Because at the end of the day, it's not one approach or one size for everyone. It's about what's going to really work for them. And, if you want to develop this long-term thing, people need to be able to do it over and over again. So,
yeah, that's why part of my online training that I provide, I wanted to just kind of do what a lot of other people were doing and make a program that I was following and throw it out there. But I realized the cookie cutter program just does not work for everyone. And I hated doing that. So I think it's so important to, take all those factors into play and create something that is going to work, because it's very custom.
it really is. And, the other element to it, I guess I'll add in as well is, you mentioned when you were playing soccer that there were some things that happened and you had to kind of reduce your training intensity, and the way that you trained for a while had to evolve and change that way based on how you were feeling. And I think that that's something that people have to understand as well is athletes are not always feeling 100%, or people are not always feeling 100%. And our training kind of becomes more of a sliding scale that's always moving up or down based on the day and based on how someone is feeling that way. So I think that having some freedom in your training, if you will, allowing people to slide forward or slide back based on how they're feeling that day is important as well. People don't always feel 100%. Sometimes they're tired. Sometimes they don't sleep well. Life gets in the way. Life happens. Sometimes things just get a little achy or crampy or whatever it is that way. And I think that it's important to note, like, you do not always have to be redlining, kind of like you mentioned before, and you can kind of adapt the training stimulus based on how you're feeling that day.
Yeah, that's a huge thing I also emphasize with variation. I'm like, not all variation even needs to be programmed in. You could also, plan a pretty darn consistent program, and then just see, like, things are going to change. You have to be flexible. You're not going to be able to train the exact way it's written out week to week, because some days you're going to be feeling worse than others. And that's where that variation will come in, where you're like, I'm not going to do heavy barbell squats today. I'm going to be on the leg press or go a little lighter or this or that.
Yeah. And I think that addition of the unstructured element within the structure is something that's often missing, because it's very difficult to do that, right? It's very hard to individualize based on structure when you don't know how someone is going to feel on the day to day. But I think that's, one of the most important elements, and one of the most, one of the things that sets good coaches from great coaches apart that way is the ability to individualize based on how someone is presenting on that day-to-day side of things.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree.
On that kind of performance longevity side, obviously, as we've talked about, there needs to be some kind of element of training. Training needs to be engaging and entertaining, and there's a lot of different ways to do that. Training needs to be done consistently, but it has to have variability to keep people engaged, but also keep people moving in a lot of different ways. And obviously, there's a competitive element to it as well, in the sense that hopefully people are working towards some kind of thing, whatever that is, whether that's the marathon or the High Rocks event or the rec soccer game that's coming up that way. But I think the other important element is honestly the social piece that can come from training that way, in the sense that a lot of times people train in a group or train with their friends, or they train in public settings where there's a lot of other people around that way. And I think that the more you can kind of all cohesively go about it, the better off everyone is going to be. Going back to the team example from earlier, a lot of people are used to training in a team environment and team atmosphere where there's 20 to 30 people around them all working towards the same thing. So I think that if you can cultivate that kind of group mentality to this kind of side of training, I guess I'll say, you can really become very unstoppable very quick.
Yeah, I think that's also very important. I'm somebody who I like to train alone. I like to be in my gym with my hood up, headphones on, but still every other Sunday we all go to a friend's house and do a garage gym workout all together. And that's different and really beneficial for me and everyone involved. So I think that's a super important component as well.
Yeah, having the balance at the end of the day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Josie, as we're talking today, I feel like we've covered a lot of different elements and pieces as I tried to just summarize there. Is there anything that we missed or anything we didn't cover on that whole kind of concept or side of, longevity, performance, and kind of training for life, if you will.
No, I don't think so. I think we covered it all.
Awesome. Josie, for people who want to find out more about you and, keep up to date with all the amazing stuff that you're doing, where can they find you at online?
My Instagram is Jevity Fit, spelled with a J. So it's JEVITY Fit. And my website is athleticlongevity.training.
Oh, look at that. Athletic longevity training, athletic longevity podcast. It lined up perfect. What are the odds? What are the odds? It's almost like we planned that or something. We will link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you did not catch that, you can just click there. Josie, I really appreciate your time and all the insights that you shared with everyone today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.